Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just so hard because I can listen to her or I can watch the screen. I'm trying to do both.
No problem.
Trying to split the eyeballs just doesn't work.
Okay, so let's just say move some of my stuff over here. Bing. Sweet. To get ideas for your kinetic typography, the things you'd want to, of course, I'd have my narrative, and I'm using Illustrator just to kind of give me ideas of how I want things to lay out. So if I actually use my text here, I'm just going to increase that. Ew. So if I have something like this and I'm just trying to get an idea of how I want to emphasize things and what fonts I want to use and the scale, so do I want it to kind of go, hello, my name is Ty Carrier, and kind of say it out loud?
So just out of curiosity, is that something where you can like type in a whole page and then you can tell it to come in one line at a time, or
It depends on how you plan on animating it. Typically, you have to make, if you have different animations, you're going to use different text. So you have to break it up. So the hello, my name is could be one line because they're all going to be treated the same. Like I can animate in After Effects word by word. But then this is going to be totally different. So that would be a separate layer, a text layer. And then I would treat that differently because it's going to come in differently. It's going to, have whatever treatment or way that I want the text to be. And then, maybe it drops down underneath. Boom, like that. And then on my next frame, I would, stop that. I would actually rotate this, and then I would have yeah, his fingers are all over the place today. So I might go in and shrink down or increase certain things. It depends, once again, when we talked about like emphasizing. So it could be, I love animation, and animation would actually be smaller, or maybe I would treat it differently. Maybe I'd have it italicized to show movement. So then in my first frame, I would have this. Think about how these drop down word by word. This rolls out underneath. Then the whole thing rotates, and then this starts spelling out on the sides. And I could change what fonts they're actually being used. have something here, and then in the next frame, how does it transition to something else? But I'm doing my planning while I'm in here to get ideas, right? And it would start to become my storyboard. Does that make sense? So I'm coming in, like if this were a storyboard, right? Let's say we're just coming in. And I'm essentially setting up what I'm going to try and do, or what I'm going to do in After Effects. And I might put some text of like, oh, this, but it starts to become self-explanatory of the things that I'm doing, right? So as I go in and I'm making these sections and making adjustments, these become the frames and the space. Oh, here's the other thing you want to be careful of. This was a problem with the previous class, is you want negative space, okay? So in other words, you don't want to fill up, if this is the screen, I don't want to fill up the entire thing. I want there to be, at least at times, negative space, show it like, so that things aren't packed right to the end of the screen. So just be careful of that when you're doing stuff. And you can use graphics. You typically, if you noticed, the graphics used are very simple. They're typically silhouetted or one or two colors only. They are not like full-on photo illustrations of things. They're very simple, okay? You don't want to distract from the text. You want to emphasize it. So the animation could simply be a little illustration of a guy that I create. Just give you an idea of what I mean. So I'm just gonna do a quick little simple little thing like this. Group that. But do you see what I mean, where I'm using something super simple to illustrate, and I'd go a little more detail, but not by much, where I could actually illustrate let's change the stroke of that. Or if I had all of this grouped together and just shrank it down, he'd be my little animation guy that would just kind of like, oh, I love animation, going across. Do you see what I mean? I'm not trying to like redefine everything. I'm just trying to emphasize the things that I want. And I'm trying to like just give slight, small little things to show. Oh, animation, little guy running across. And I could actually set that up. Doesn't have to be like, oh, it's a perfect high-res CG character. No, simple, right? I don't want people to stop and look at that much detail. I just want them to get the impression. It could even be a ball bouncing going across, right? You know, then it could drop down and it could be like, and then I change the font here to something more specific to video games that I think would actually work. You know, so you're just basically going in, and maybe there'd be like a little gamepad that swings down there, or like, you know, some little thing that I could do, and then whatever. But you see what I mean, where it's like, it could even be like a little crosshair or something that I had, you know, kind of showing what kind of video game I like, right? So if we did something that's like a little... fill you up. And then just have like a little crosshair here. Look at the stroke. Grab all of these, use the alignment tool. There we go. Oops. So like this is a crosshair. Maybe I'd have this by itself kind of animated like, oh, I love video games, or whatever, you know, icon I'd want to have for a video game, and then something else. Might even be cool, like this could go boom, 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 and it's almost like it just shoots it out or something, or it could be something more Mario-esque, you know, or something like that, just depending. Once again, simple. If you're going to use illustration, mostly silhouettes and suggestive stuff rather than full-on detailed. Even when they had people there, you'll notice it was silhouetted a lot, you know, and very, very monochromatic or that kind of thing. And you don't have to do these. It's just a matter of, like, how do I want to and when I want to emphasize things, you know. It could have been like an illustration of a gamepad or something like that. And then you'd have to decide, like, okay, so what am I going to do? You know, maybe it's like, oh, there's there. Then I'd want to do, like, what's going to be my next phase, how this would transition. And I could even put in, like, oh, in this one, first text rotates then reveals each line depending on content. And this is just like my little instructions of my storyboard. So I'm like, oh, okay, this is what's going on here. And then in this one, it's like, oh, first line flies in from the right side. Each word, then name drops down from first line. But do you see what I mean? Where you start to like plan it out. Does that make sense? So this is how you could do a good portion of your storyboard, is just getting it. It doesn't mean you're not going to change a few things, but if you don't at least have that, this is how you have to plan for it, because we have to group different sentences and words together so that we can actually have it. To have this rotate, this whole thing has to be in a group. And ultimately what we're going to have to do for a lot of these, it sounds weird, but you have to kind of go backwards to make things work right. So you have to build it the way it's going to be and then reverse it to get it to the beginning, if that makes sense. I know it sounds weird, but it's actually easier that way to get the end result and then go backwards from there for certain things. But that means we need to know what the end result is, and that's what we're doing, is planning that out. I can even give myself some cues, like, oh, I'm going to do a line like here. And then just tell it, oh, it's going to be an arrow. Pull up arrows here. And say like, oh, it's going to be like this. See? So now I'm making these arrows to kind of show where this is coming from. First line flies in from the right, boom. Word, right side, each word at a time. And then this drops down, kind of flips down from the first line. Then name drops down. Does that make sense? So this will help you with your planning of it. Think of like letters that pop in one by one, words that pop in. They can drop like they're hanging, like fold down, fold up. They can move in and out from the top, bottom, left, right, whatever angle you choose. They can do a zoom in, which is sort of like when you have a word like this, just so you can kind of see that maybe it starts off so big that it's actually huge, and then it drops in. So those are all things to consider. Layers, text, there we go. Okay. Okay. So, but that's how I would start to plan it out, and then just go think about what, like, I would put down all the rows, and then I would do a quick description of how you're going to get to there, right? Not like, oh yes, it's going to rotate approximately 30.56, no, degrees. It doesn't have to be that precise, but you want to have a plan. So like for this little guy, first text reveal rotates, then reveals each line depending on content with, icon animation. And then I could have like on a second one, like, oh, the little guy for animation runs across the screen, or the crosshair goes and shoots out video games, and that's how it spells out. Or think about different ways of doing that. Okay? Keep it, for right now, simple. Have good ideas, but don't try to like go totally nuts with being elaborate. I don't want you to get too tied up in the technical aspects. So we're going to go over in the next class how to do a lot of the After Effects stuff. And we'll be spending the next few weeks on After Effects. So there's a lot of preset animations that are in it that are nice. And there's ones that we can kind of cluster and put together for it. You could even rig a character if you wanted to with groups and have them animate, stuff like that. Or I could animate it in Maya, bring it in as a silhouette, and just bring it in. So, there's a lot of different options, but just, like I said, keep it simple. And then think about how I would want colors if I'm going to use any. So if we talked about like the colors, do I differentiate things like this, where I would have a color Gesundheit, maybe something where I'm breaking up the screen like this. So maybe it started off that this came in like this. It just animated and came across, boop, and was like that. And then that whole thing rotated and the text shrank, and then these guys just start dropping down. Imagine them dropping or coming in with motion blur. And then how would it transition to the next part? But like I said, keep it simple. Maybe it does go all the way to the end of the screen. Maybe it stays just more locked to where the text is, and then I have boxes that are here breaking things up. Or maybe it's just a separate box that's over here. But to vary it up, I need to make it a different color. And what color would that be? Be careful of it being too intense at different times and which colors you use. So try and not go to heavy saturation if you can, because it makes it a little bit easier on the eyes and it pops the text out more. Stay away from small fonts that are red on black backgrounds. Those don't work well. If the text is bigger, but also remember what red means. Hazard, danger, import, especially if it's a bright red. You can go with something that's more like a darker burgundy or something like that, but when you get into those bright reds, I want you to see the difference is like, see how it vibrates? And it's not as appealing, you know. The only way it starts to work is if you like drop out white, like if the text is white on top of it. But even then, you have to have a really good reason why you're using a bright red, unless it's like, you know, I wouldn't even use red with video games because of the negative connection towards it, because people like, oh yes, of course it's violent. It's like, so. It really just depends on what it is you're trying to show. And try not to have too many colors on the screen at once. You'll notice that a lot of those, they didn't really have that, right? A nice little trick of color is when you choose a particular color, stick within the same value, but just change the color. So like, oh, these are like a certain value, and now if I just change the color to it, it still maintains that value, right? As opposed, so I didn't change the value or saturation, I just changed which color it is that it was showing there. See? So definitely think about, little things that you could do for that. Does that make sense? Cool. Any questions? Yes.
Do we have to do the typography like that, like flipping around and stuff like that, like you do? Does that have to do that?
You decide, but keep it legible and clear. So you can decide how it's going to come in, how it animates.
Okay, because
That's the important part. Make sure it's legible and clear, and it's on pace. Remember, you're thinking of your target market, so keep it simple.
And I'm not sure if it would be right. We have to keep, and we have to use the right grammar and everything too.
Yes.
That'll help. Okay.
Yes, please spell check.
so
Type your stuff up in Word, use Grammarly, use all that stuff, and make sure that you have the proper, because I have a bad habit, I'm horrible at that. If I'm like going really fast, of just not, I'll fix it later, and I run everything afterwards through Grammarly if I can, just because it slows me down sometimes to go back and like just keep retyping things because I'm just trying to get a thought down.
okay. Yeah, it's just because you said like the kinetic typography thing. I'm just curious, like, what do you mean by that? Is it like? I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's just like, is it like the flipping thing and other stuff?
It's text that is moving.
Yeah, but it's just because. Oh, okay. The text that moves over. I was gonna go like. I was gonna show you. I want to do that watery thing. Go. I wanted to do that.
Think of your target market. Think of if anytime I'm trying to communicate something, the whole idea is that I have to let people know something or let it so that they can read it, follow it. Yeah, I want to put some pizzazz, make it, make it fun. But if it's so wild and crazy, or I'm using fonts that's too hard to read and they're moving fast, I can't communicate with people. So your concept is communication, and making something appropriate with what's said. You want to get the most amount of people.
It's just because they did the kinetic typography, because they were moving the things around, that they already did that already. Because the Dennis Pereira kind of moved there, and isn't that kinetic typography, like he did like Niagara or something like that?
It is, it's just that it's more specific to one word. Now you're talking about multiple words and an idea, not just a symbol or a name.
Okay. Oh,
So I have to emphasize which words and how they go together.
Oh, so we have to do it for each. So we're writing not just one word, we have to write multiple
Yep,
words.
it's a narrative.
Oh, okay. Does it have to be ourselves or somebody else? Does it really have to be like, alright, like something about ourselves or something like that?
If you give me an idea of something else you'd want to do, because it's only supposed to be 10 or 15 seconds max. Isn't it? So if it's longer, the only fear is that when you start getting into other stuff, it can be longer, or, I mean, if you give me an idea, I'm always open to if somebody has, hey, I have a cool idea I'd like to do, run it by me, you know, other than this. But I'd have to approve it.
Oh.
So I'm open to it, it's just it still has to meet those parameters, and you still have to think about emphasizing which words, how you're going to animate them. You're not going to use the same font for all your text. You're not going to use the same size for all your text. You want it to be in motion. You want to basically communicate while entertaining somebody who's reading it. But you don't want to come off like we talked about of it being so fancy and so, you know, so out there. Well, you don't get it, and you're not cool enough. You don't want to have that impression, you know. That's always the hard part. That is the difference between fine art and commercial art. And fine art, you can get away with anything. I'm not gonna lie. It's not saying that there, you know, fine art is in the eye of the beholder and the person who's rich enough and likes it to back it. Commercial art, motion graphics is all about communication. You're not showing that you can squeeze in every plug-in and every effect that you can. You're showing that you can communicate an idea and emphasize it. So that's the biggest thing, right? That's the brownie points. How can I communicate what I'm saying? It be fun, but legible, and people will get it and follow it. So be careful of fonts that are illegible. You don't want a font that is so fancy that people can't read it.
Because making the word, I'm curious that, when making the word and then another font, because of the next one, does it have to be like sideways and other stuff like yours, or can it be even?
It is up to you of how to show it you're communicating. I'm giving you ideas.
Okay, just
How you execute it is up to you. But you're sticking with certain parameters of continuity and legibility, right? They can pop up in different, ways. It depends on what you're saying.
It's just because, I'm sorry, because I know, I don't know what you meant by this. I know what you want, but it's just that I don't know if it's, because I really want to do it, but I don't know if it's correct.
Only way I know is if you give me a storyboard or jot down what your idea is. But just think about how you would communicate it.
You could even have the words be like cards, being at a card table and then having the words show up like cards.
You could have multiple ways. I'm just showing you different ways that you can execute the text. So we'll be going over that more next week. But look at some of the examples. You can mask things out. So that means like I have a mask of a circle that opens up and then it shows the font behind it, right? I can have sweeps to show it. you know, where it's invisible, and then whoosh, we see the text. I can have things flip down, letters spell out. How do you want to communicate it? And that's depending on what the word is and what you want to emphasize, right? If I said, you know, the hero was strong, then I would have the word strong, bigger, bolder letters, right? To show that it's strong. If I said strong in a nice little fancy script, that's like, is it really?
Yeah, I know.
You know?
I know what you're saying. It's
So
just,
that's it.
I
Do you have any questions?
no, just,
Oh, sure. No, so think about your emphasis for every sentence and what the words are. So this is the essence of communication. And especially when you're talking like cultural and stuff, of different languages, emphasizing certain words more than others. Wars have started because of bad communication. Saying something that wasn't intended to be taken a certain way. So this is where we have to stop and think. And I know, especially right now in this day and age, a lot of times people don't. There's no filter, there's no thought, it just spouts out. And it can be taken in so many different ways if people actually thought a little bit more about what they say and how they say it and how it's perceived. We'd have a lot less issues. But as a designer, that's your job, is to communicate and to stop and think about how I'm saying things and how they're perceived and what I'm emphasizing.
I know it's, were you going to say something else?
That is about it.
I'm sorry, I know you said it's up to me, but I mean, I just didn't want to. I know it's up to me, but why are you telling me this? I just know that already.
Well, I'm telling to everybody,
I'm
because it's something to think about from previous classes. It's something that people forget. The first place to start is to find or write down your narrative. That's the very first thing. Write it down, then we can look at it and say, you know, and then start, once it's written down in front of you, what words are you going to emphasize? And then you start to look at different fonts. Which fonts am I going to use to emphasize those things? Is this a strong word, or is it a subtle word? Am I saying this loud, it has importance, or is it more transitional, right? That's the things I want you to think about and how to apply it. But it starts with whatever the narrative is, or what. If you pick something, run it by me. Still write a narrative so that if I say, yeah, I don't know if this will work or not. And only like 10, 15 seconds long. Something about you.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, it doesn't have to be like next word and next word. You could just be, when you're doing 15 seconds, it could just be on one side, and it doesn't have to be as much words, right? Just be one slide and just the words be there.
I have to see the words first.
Okay.
I can't tell you until you write down what your narrative is. But you don't want it to be just subtitles flashing one after the other. That's not really kinetic. Kinetic is what you saw. Kinetic is moving. Transitions, emphasis. Look at the examples. Get ideas. But write your narrative first, or get the narrative that you want first. And then that will help you out a lot with it. Does that make sense?